Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Empowered Mind Collective Book Club. I am Coach Christine Patera, and I'm just so grateful that you're here to explore this book with me. And this is a new platform for me and a new way of doing this. So bear with me if there's technical difficulties already. I'm like, oh, my screen is showing more than I thought it was going to show, even though I pre-set it up. You know how it goes. And I just hope that you will interact with me in the chat, share your insights in the comments as well as in the chat if you're here live. And more than anything else, I hope that you will be excited about exploring this book, Whole Brain Living by Jill Bolte Taylor. And I'm having so much fun with what it feels like already a very shallow dive into the content of this book. But this is the first of a 4-week series. We'll be exploring how and learning to understand how the brain can help us live a more empowered and balanced life. And I'm so excited about this content because it really resonates with me as a master health coach and a personal trainer. I've been doing this job full time as my full living for the past 10 plus years. And one of the things I do as a coach is really help people make behavior change. And a lot of folks come into my gym or reach out to me, and this is not something they're really thinking about. They don't realize that those body composition goals that they have, or maybe those performance-based goals that they have, are really going to make a big difference in their whole life, right? The habits that we have resonate through everything that we do. I know it's kind of cliche, but you've heard it said, how you do one thing is how you do all things, right? So that's what this book is about. It's about helping us understand our behaviors, or at least that's what I am excited about taking away from this. And I'm sure that will take away other things as well. And I hope that you will share your insights in the comments below as we chat. I've run book clubs for years now. We've done books like Herding Tigers, we've done Atomic Habits. Most recently, we did the new Adam Grant book. Why can't I think of the name of it? Hidden Potential, which was so great. And I really like to lead these as interactive conversations. So having this sort of one-sided conversation is a bit new for me. So I hope that you will interact in the chat and that you will interact in the comments. This just gives us a little bit different forum, a little bit more open space where we can be more flexible, that we can record these videos and you guys can interact on your own time, which I'm super excited about. So today we're going to be covering part 1, focusing on the chapters 1 through 3, which give us the foundation of the anatomy of the brain and its impact on our personalities, behavior, and even potentially our mental health. And I was so excited to hear that Jill Bolte Taylor is the narrator for this book. So if you have the Audible version, you get to hear her talk. So I want to talk a little bit about how I came to explore this topic in this book so that you guys can maybe explore some of these other resources as well for yourself. First of all, I was and still finishing another book. I'm just like always voraciously reading, let's be real. Where I learned about this. And the book that I learned about Jill Bolte Taylor is called Finding Your Way in the Wild New World. Reclaim Your True Nature to Create the Life You Want by Martha Beck. And this book, love it, by the way. If you are a person who works in a coaching capacity in any way, shape, or form, if you're a mentor or you want to be, read this book. It's a really, really awesome book. And this is the book that I found out about Jill Bolte Taylor and her TED Talk called My Stroke of Insight. So there's the next thing that you're going to want to go check out. You're going to want to check out My Stroke of Insight. Apparently, before my time of watching TED Talks, this was one of the first TED Talks, and actually she talks about it in Whole Brain Living, that really became like a viral TED Talk. And it's so good. And one of the things that I loved when I was watching this TED Talk, I always oftentimes read the comments as I'm watching things on YouTube. Somebody said, something along the lines of like, how metal is it that this woman is holding an actual brain? And she totally is. She brought an actual brain with her to do this TED Talk, which is totally BA. And I'm like, much respect. She's a nerd of a feather, and I love it. So go check out that TED Talk, My Stroke of Insight. It's not very long, maybe 15, 20 minutes long, and it's really, really moving. And she has another book that she's written um, called My Stroke of Insight, which I have not yet read, but I was really attracted to this particular book, Whole Brain Living, because of the implication that we really have a lot of choice in the way that we show up in the world. And this message resonates so much with me, again, as a health coach and a personal trainer, because oftentimes people come to see me and they feel like they don't have control over their behaviors, or they don't have control over the choices that they're making. They feel very influenced by perhaps their environment or their upbringing. And to me, the message I think that's really coming through with this book is that we have a lot more control than we realize. So I'm really excited to dive into this more. If you're new to the book club, here's how it works. I will summarize the key points. I'll share my thoughts. My perspective really comes from my background in health and wellness and fitness. And we're going to dive into the brain's different parts. We're going to learn about the four characters of our brain that Dr. Taylor includes here. And I just encourage you to grab your book, whether you have a hard copy or you have the Audible copy. Keep it close by. We're doing chapters 1 through 3 today. And we are going to, if you have Spotify, which is really cool, if you pay for Spotify, it's on Spotify. So that is how I'm listening to the book. I'm a huge fan of Audible books. I like to multitask, which is not always the best thing ever for consuming information, but mainly it's me walking or me on the elliptical or the treadmill or something when I'm reading my books. So I do a lot of outdoor time, and I have a feeling there's going to be some big takeaways about me when it comes to that and the way my brain works here in the book. So let's dive in. Grab your books. So whether you're reading along or you're listening, take some time for yourself to reflect on this information and really how it applies to your own life, because that's what it's all about, right? Like, how can we use this information to make our own lives better? How can we use this information to perhaps make behavior change, or make some of those habit changes, or start exercising more or eat healthier or whatever it may be. I mean, that's where my jam is, but I'm sure there's going to be other little nuggets in here for you as well. So in chapter 1, Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor takes us back to the morning of her stroke, which again, if you'll read about it in the book, but you can also watch her TED Talk on this, where her ability to communicate and perceive reality and even comprehend her own identity began to unravel. And if you start to really put yourself in her shoes, first of all, how cool is it? She's a neuroanatomist. She's really into the anatomy of the brain, and she gets to experience this brain activity from an insider's perspective, which is not something that most people maybe wouldn't think that way, right? Just because of her personal background, she's like, wow, this is amazing. And we're introduced in this really vivid storytelling moment, which give her a high five for like her amazing storytelling. And she's a great narrator, so enjoy it. But a really vivid introduction of how the interconnected parts of our brain work together, and how when one part of her brain really was shut off during that stroke, it created this sense of awe and wonder, and she lost her perspective of her individuality, which is so striking to me. I was blown away about how she described the balance between, our left and right hemispheres and how they shape our reality. So curious, what are your reactions to that? What were your takeaways when it came to thinking about that vastness? Personally, that's the thing that really struck home with me, is that she had this sense that she was a part of a really amazingly big whole. And she lost her individuality in a way. And I think that really speaks to our, at least for me personally, a part of my brain that I think I kind of shut off a lot, right? Or I have to be very conscious in trying to bring myself back to the reality that I am a part of a much bigger whole. So there was that. And then she talks a lot in this first part, again, just about the way that her stroke impacted her. And I really encourage you to go back and watch that TED Talk if you want a more in-depth perspective on this. She also has a newer video. I'll make sure to post links to all this in the comments below, where she sort of talks more about what the whole brain living side of this is about and how we can learn to know about the four characters, as she calls them, and as we're going to dive into deeper here in our brain, and how that we have more autonomy in our choices once we kind of start to recognize these characters. So that's what chapter 1 is really all about. It's about going back to the morning of the stroke, walking through what that felt like and where the insights from this book really came from her. She also talks a little bit about her brother and his struggle with schizophrenia. She also has a really important disclaimer, I think. I believe it's in this part of the book, about how, if you have some brain-based diseases like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, that your brain is not working in a neurotypical way. So some of the things in this book might not be relevant or might not make sense because your brain is wired a little bit differently. So a lot of the tricks and tips and tools, this is a disclaimer from her, that are coming through in this book are really for neurotypical folks. So I think that's an important disclaimer. Um, so in chapter 2, we go right into the four characters. And this is the part that I think I'm probably going to end up talking the most about today, because I find these really fascinating. So we're introduced to the four characters, or the four parts of the brain. And character 1, which is called the left thinking part of our brain. And Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor really encourages us each to come up with names for these parts of our brain. And I haven't come up with names yet, but I think as we go along and we dive deeper into each of these, I will, and I'll be happy to share them. But I hope you'll share your brain part names if you have them as well. So character 1 is logical and focus. It is the task oriented part of our brain. So that's that left thinking brain. And she does talk quite a bit in the book about how we went a little bit overboard with left brain versus right brain at one point. Like in the 70s and 80s, a lot of this research was being done. And then, we were like, whoa, you're left brain, or oh, you're right brain. But it's a little bit more complex than that. Character 2 is the left emotional part of our brain. So this is kind of where it gets into that complexity more than we perhaps recognize right away, right? Left emotional. And when we think of left side brain, we also oftentimes are thinking of that logical focus part. But character 2 is reactive and often governed by fear and anger. And then character 3 is our right emotional brain. So it's spontaneous and joyful. So you can see a direct, like, there's so opposite there, right? So character 2 being left emotional, reactive, governed by fear and anger, and character 3 right emotional, being spontaneous and joyful. And then we have character 4, our right thinking. So there's another perhaps not as well known part of the brain, that your right thinking part of your brain is there, and it's peaceful and connected. That is the piece that when she had her stroke, she's saying really took over. It was the most functioning part of her brain, where she was able to step into one and awe and connectedness. So these four parts of the brain, or personalities, live within each of us. And she makes a lot of reference to reminding us that none of them are better than the other. None is good or bad, which I love, really stepping into that mindset, because this is where growth happens, right? Knowing that if we understand these different parts of our brain and these different characters, that we can decide actively in our lives at different parts in our lives when we want certain parts to be more prominent or more turned on. And they're always there and they're always with us. And she talks a little bit further on in the book about brain huddles, which I'm super excited to dive more into because I think we'll learn more about in the next part of the book about how when we're making decisions, it can be of value to connect with all four parts of our brain and be like, okay, guys, now the whole team's here. And if you know me, I love a good sports analogy. So this super resonated with me. One of the things that's so powerful about working in a team is that when you have all the parts of the wholes and all their different strengths working together, it is such a magical moment. And that's what I love about team sports. And that's what I love about this analogy, because if you think about the four characters in your brain as like, four team members that all have different strengths and weaknesses. And if they can figure out how to work together, they can really make some great choices and make some magic happen. So that's what I was so excited about, that huddle analogy. And I can't wait to hear more about it because she says that she's going to teach us more about it as the book goes on. So I'm curious, what I want to know from you in the chat below, and I'll put these questions in a comment later too, is can you identify which of these characters you resonate the most or relate the most to? I'd love to hear. Drop it in the chat, drop it in the comments below. For me, my first initial instinct was all of them. I was like, I know who all of these people are. But there have been times in my life where certain parts of our certain characters have really stepped forward and taken control. I would say character two, my left emotional, the reactive and fear based part of my brain has been a big character in my life, unfortunately. And I don't typically go to anger. And she talks about if you're a person who is goes into fight or flight a lot, that and it's fight or flight, or what did she say? She said fight or flight, or like play dead, basically, like hide. And I would say I am a play dead, hide guy. When something feels uncomfortable to me, I rather just not look at it. I rather just pretend like it's not there. Like I can get really amped up about perhaps making behavior change. So say I wanted to, eat healthier. I'm like, yeah, I'm really excited about it. And I'll do all this research. So there's my logical and focus and task oriented part of my brain. I'll do all this research. I get really into it. I might even be tapping into my right emotional, my character three there, where it's spontaneous and joyful, because it is to me like new adventures feel spontaneous and joyful. But as soon as it starts getting hard, as soon as things don't work as perfectly as they're supposed to, like as soon as my husband walks in the door and he's like, let's go out to eat, my character too rears its ugly head. And you know what? I said that I don't get angry, but that's not true. I do. I get angry and I sometimes will say things that I don't mean because I'm afraid that is going to throw me off of my path. Right. So my left emotional brain has definitely been a big player in my life and something that I've worked really hard to gain more control over and be able to say, you know what? You're afraid of something that you don't need to be afraid of. And I think, again, going back to that part of this where it's like none of these are bad, we have to remember that left emotional brain, that character two, is there for a reason. It's there to protect us. It's there to help us when we are afraid of failing or getting hurt, right? It can save us. It's the same part of our brain that goes, hey, remember that the stove is hot, don't touch it, right? It's that same part of the brain, but it can also hold us back in a lot of ways. And I thought it was interesting how she mentioned that oftentimes when you read things or hear coaches or great thinkers talk about our authentic self, that they're oftentimes talking about character four, which is our peaceful, connected self. I can't say that I really resonate with that. but perhaps this is just because a lot of work that I've done in my own life. Authentic self to me is a little bit of everything. It's good, bad, indifferent. It's all of those things. And as a coach, if you've ever worked with me or you've ever seen any of the things that I've done, you know that I know this about each of us. We each have these different parts of us. And when we embrace them and we start to understand, again, what their strengths are, we can really use it to our advantage. So I'm really excited to see how these characters are going to play out. I know we're going to take a deeper dive into each of these as we go through the book. So don't forget to share in the chat or in the comments below which of the characters do you resonate with the most. Unfortunately, right now, I guess mine is my character 2. But just to refresh, character 1, left thinking, is logical and focused, tasks oriented. Character 2, left emotional, is reactive, governed by fear and anger. That's our fight or flight or hide, if you're me. Excuse me. Character 3, right emotional, spontaneous and joyful. I've definitely made some spontaneous decisions in my life before. And then character 4 is our peaceful and connected self. All right. So moving on to chapter 3. How our brain cells build our perception of reality. So this is where Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor, it's quite a name. I'm going to say Dr. Taylor, where she really dives into the anatomy piece and giving us some understanding. And if you're an anatomy nerd, you probably really, really like this part. If you were like, I don't care about any of that, maybe you tuned it out a little bit. But let's talk about it, right? She explains how the different parts of the brain perceive and process information. And she talks about neuroplasticity and how the brain can rewrite itself, which is something that if you're someone who really wants to make behavior change, you should be really excited about. um, and when I say behavior change, to be clear, this could be if you want to make any changes in your life, because everything we do is based in our day to day behaviors. And then they manifest into the way that our life plays out, really. And it also influences our perception of reality, which is this is where she dove in and talked about some of the studies that were done. She talked about the right brain versus left brain, where there was, I'm sorry I didn't write down the studies names of the doctor, but there was a doctor who did some studies where they disconnected the different sides of the brain, and they were able to help people who had seizures, and but also you could see some really conflicting behaviors from people. So there's one guy that she talked about who with one hand was going to slap his wife and with the other was protecting her. um, so it just goes to show that, our brains don't, they have these two sides or these four characters, but they don't exist in isolation. And I love this analogy because this is something I talk about with the systems of the body with my clients all the time, right? Like nothing in the body exists in isolation. Really, it's a big system, many systems actually, that work together in an amazing symphony, which if you just take a minute, here comes my character 4, a minute of awe and wonder about how our bodies are function, right? All of these different systems between our lymphatic system, our cardiovascular system, our skeletal system, our muscular system, our organs, like there's so many amazing things going on in our body. Give yourself a moment for the awe and wonder and have a little gratitude for that. One of my major takeaways from this piece was that we can choose how to perceive the world by consciously engaging these different parts of our brain. And yes, this concept is incredibly empowering. So, if you're someone, again, stepping into my health coach role that's sitting there thinking, I want to exercise more, or, but I'm always like never having time, or I want to make healthier food choices, but I'm being sabotaged by those around me. We always have a choice as long as we're in a safe space, right? Sometimes we're not in a safe space, and those of us not in a safe space don't always have a choice. But if you are in a safe space where you have autonomy, you have a choice. And I can think about this in a nutrition focused way. I was having a conversation with a client the other day, and she was talking about food choices when she was going out to eat, and how this particular person was very socially influenced. Now, not everybody is socially influenced in their food choices, but a lot of people are. And I've met a lot of clients over time, and I am, right? Like, I definitely am. And I've talked to her about how sometimes I'll sit down with a client and they'll say, okay, I'm going out to eat next week and we're going to go to this restaurant. Here's the menu. I want to look at it with you and we're going to decide what I'm going to eat right now. And I want you to help me be accountable to that, which is a great strategy, right? Because accountability, like they're going to have to come back in a week from now and they're going to have to say, like, okay, I did it or I didn't do it or I did okay. And we'll do that. We'll sit down, we'll pick out maybe the salad and the chicken and whatever. And then they go out and they have their date with their friends and they come back and they say, I blew it. Everybody else at the table was eating cheeseburgers and french fries. And I had this intense sense of FOMO and it was really hard for me. And I made different choices than I said I was going to make. And I never shame anybody for this, and you should never feel shame for it, right? But they get frustrated because they're like, I don't understand. I said I was going to do this. And I went in there and I prepared and I had the accountability and I had everything you said I was going to need and that I thought I was going to need. And I still chose to cave to the social pressures. And this is where the power of choice really comes in. So, a bigger conversation oftentimes needs to happen with this client at that moment, right? Perhaps we take a step back and we go, well, why did that happen? Why did you choose that? In that moment, you were prioritizing perhaps social connection. And this is something we always talk about with food, is that food is so much more than fuel, right? It is our memories. And Dr. Taylor talks about this part of our brain that connects our memories and how it can be painful, but it's also there to protect us, right? Um, so it's memories, it's social connection. There's so much wrapped into the choices that we make that sometimes we sort of remove ourselves from, or we want to just make the good choice. We just want to rip the band-aid off and we want to be there. And it doesn't always work that way. So we have to take a step back and go, okay, why did this happen? And how can we reframe this situation so that you can make perhaps a better choice? It doesn't have to be the best choice. So if like this week, I am always choosing, like right now, I'm not thinking about it at all, and I would have chosen cheeseburgers and French fries. Cool, that's fine. But if you wanted to make a slightly healthier choice, what would that look like? Rather than saying, "Oh, I'm going to eat lettuce with chicken on top of it," maybe I'm just going to have the burger and maybe I'll have a side salad instead of the fries, right? So we need to come up with ways to make making that choice that you want to make a little bit easier. And that's where this concept of consciously engaging the different parts of the brain becomes incredibly powerful, where you start to regain some of your autonomy in your decision making rather than having that one part of the brain take over and go like, oh no, it can only be this way. And this is like black and white or all or nothing thinking. And we talk about this in a broader context, oftentimes, not so much when it comes to the anatomy, but look at that. This is part of the anatomy of what's happening in our brains. So there's actual physical things going on, which are really fascinating. This chapter just made me really think about how we have the power to shift our perspective in different situations. And I think it's a good question to ask yourself now. How do you see this playing out in your life? Drop some thoughts into the chat or into the comments below. What are one or two? We want to keep this very concise. One or two things that you could see if you had tapped into a slightly different character, maybe it would have shifted a choice that you made. Maybe there's something that you're working towards right now that you're feeling. And I would go for this if this is happening. You're working towards a specific goal right now and you're feeling tension. Why is that? And how could you tap into those other parts of your brain, perhaps gratitude? So there's that character 4 piece. I think character 4, or maybe character 3, the joyous part. But how could you tap into those grateful emotions and say, I'm so grateful that I get to eat this burger and this side salad. I'm grateful that this is something that I can do. I don't know. I'd love to hear your perspective. Tell me, what do you think about having the power to shift your perspectives? Does that help you feel empowered? Is there something in particular that you're feeling sticky with right now? So those are our 3 chapters. We got a couple other little open discussion points. So I encourage you to take a few minutes and think if you have any questions. What were some of your biggest takeaways? Maybe it was the characters that you see, character 1, 2, 3, or 4. And if you have any additional big takeaways from these first 3 chapters, to me, it felt like this was really setting us up for what we're going to explore in the rest of the book. It was an introduction to why this topic is resonant with the author. So why is this topic resonant with you? Are you interested in having more autonomy and choice? I am. And I'm interested in helping people understand how to have more autonomy and feel more empowered in the choices that they make so that they can reach their goals. That's why I'm here. So, why are you here? And have you noticed when you're shifting between characters? I have not yet. I don't think I've fully embodied this information enough. I'm starting to kind of draw connections between, oh, that's that character, and oh, that's that character. Um, but if so, if you're already able to kind of tap in and you already notice that shifting, uh, have you figured out any ways that you can actually use that ability? How are you tapping into the different aspects of the brain when you need them? I'm interested to see how this plays out for me in my day-to-day life, when that logical thinking brain is working, and when I definitely think my logical thinking brain and focused and task-oriented part is very present. And as she said in the book, like, we wouldn't be able to function in the world if we didn't have that character 1. Um, but perhaps, those other parts will become more apparent as we work through this work. So I'm excited to see how that works for me, and I can't wait to hear from you as well. And my personal challenge for you this week is to try to notice which character is driving your behavior throughout the day. When you're in character 1 or 2, or when you feel like you're operating from character 3 or 4. And I think what I might do, which might be helpful, is to just kind of have these on my phone. I put everything in my phone notes. And I have notes. That's how I manage my notes for this, what we're talking about right now. So I think I would just put out those 4 characters on a phone note so that I could, when I think of it, open it up and go, okay, yeah, it's that one. I can start to draw those connections. I can really start to see, like, who is in charge right now, and start to think about why. Why is that part in charge? And should it be? Very interesting concept to think about. So for next week, we are going to dive into chapters 4 through 6. Where Dr. Taylor is going to help us explore practical ways to strengthen our abilities to shift between those 4 characters. So we're just diving into this. We're going to learn more and live a more balanced life. And we'll get into how we can bring these into our daily habits and routines. If you haven't even started reading yet, no big deal. You can catch up on this really quickly. It was basically an introduction in, I'd say, the through the first chapter was very much an introduction to like why these topics were pertinent. And then in chapter 2 and 3, she really started to dive into the characters, talking about I did want to draw a connection, and I wanted to point out she talked about Sigmund Freud and the four. I don't know. I don't have an exact title for but the four. He has a similar theory of four parts or personalities. I was struck by another book that we've read in book club before called The Four Tendencies. So if you're familiar with The Four Tendencies by Gretchen Rubin, which is about motivational habits. That's a really interesting read as well. She has some other great book recommendations in here, some books that I haven't read yet, but it also made me think about those four tendencies. So, why we do the things that we do. And she also talked about her father in one of the chapters. I think it was chapter 3. And he was I can't remember if it was a psychiatrist or a psychologist. I can't remember off the top of my head, but he was really big into personality tests. And she talks about how personality tests are really valuable, but also somewhat limiting, but they're kind of fun. So if you want to dabble, check out the four tendencies. If you want to learn more, this is all self-awareness building, in my opinion. She talked about Myers-Briggs, which was her father's favorite personality test. If you want to share those, put them in the comments. There's other ones. There's the Enneagram. Like these are all just tools to get to know yourself a little bit better. And they might give you insight on how your brain works too, if you're curious. So go ahead and dive in. So for next week, we're going to read chapters 4 through 6 or listen to 4 through 6. And we'll meet again at the same time on Monday at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Don't forget to bring your book and be mindful of which part of your brain you're operating from. That is our goal for next week, is to kind of start, or for this week, is to pay attention as we're going through our day. Who is my lead character? Or maybe my team is working, and that would be cool too, right? So thank you so much for being a part of today's discussion. It was a joy to dive into whole brain living with you. I can't wait to hear more of your thoughts next week. You can stay connected with me on social media. I'm on Instagram at coach_Christine B. I'm also on TikTok. I'm also here on YouTube. Be free. Character number 4. Feel free to share this series with your friends who might benefit from it. You can follow along at your own time and your own pace. We've got 4 weeks in this. This is just week 1. It's just going to keep you motivated to kind of keep going with the reading. I hope you have an amazing week. And remember that each character in your brain is there to serve you in different ways. They're not good or bad. So let's be intentional about using them all. But really building self-awareness is our primary focus for this week, to see which characters are stepping up the most. And I can't wait to see you next Monday. I'm Coach Christine. I'll see you then.